We're going to peel back to deeper layers of the nature of productivity. We're going to see what Mike Rowe says about the nature of what he calls honest work. And then we're going to go even deeper with the help of Ayn Rand by seeing what she says about the nature of the self who is doing the work, as well as the self who's producing values. What do you think of when you hear the word productivity? This is not, my questions are never rhetorical, so I'm going to wait until people start talking.
Doing more with less.
Do more with less.
Making stuff.
Making stuff.
Doing work that's meaningful.
Doing work that's meaningful.
Something related to efficiency.
Something related to efficiency.
Functional effectiveness.
Effectiveness.
Can you be productive with your leisure? Like activity has a goal and you're actually doing your vacation right. I don't know. I'm sorry. Like to say creating value and stuff like that, but this is one of those weird things. I'm like, if I do my leisure right and get the relaxation I was aiming for, does that mean productive?
That's an excellent question, and perhaps we can circle back later to that question, but then you're asking the question without having answered my question, because you're using the word productively use your leisure, and I was like, well, what do you mean by productive? Okay, so goal achievement, doing more with less, being efficient. Right, so we've got various, and these are all very common answers. Stephen.
You're a nihilist and you're efficient at blowing stuff up.
Okay, well you could efficiently blow stuff up. So, but that's a different thing. So it could be, now you're asking questions about what you're doing with your productivity, not what productivity is. And actually we will eventually perhaps circle around to that question or point as well. So the more inflammatory the question, the more interesting the conversation will be later as we discuss and work through various issues and questions and writing prompts that we're going to be taking a look at. But what some of you brought up about efficiency, doing more with less, being kind of cost effective, making things, and these are all things that are commonly associated with productivity, and they're kind of all in the ballpark of stuff like this. Doing more with less, creating value, being efficient, perhaps with your time. I actually went out and I found a productivity planner. This was good for 60 weeks of productivity planning. You want to do more with less? Maybe this can help you. Okay, so this is what a lot of people think of, and the guy in the middle, getting things done, that's David Allen, the GTD plan. I don't know how many of you have heard of GTD. They're actually like meetup groups, GTD meetup groups, where people get together so they can productivity plan together. Yesterday, Bill told me he's learned about bullet journaling. If you want to triple your productivity, do more with less. Keep a bullet journal. What do you do with your bullet journal, Bill?
I like it because you can tailor it to you. A lot of to-do list stuff, scheduling, and ideas. Mm-hmm. But just kind of something so that I don't forget.
Okay, so writing down, you offload your memory. Stuff you don't want to forget, you put in your bullet journal, and you do it every day.
I try to, yes.
Okay, so maybe you need a bullet journal for your bullet journal.
Exactly.
And this will help you get things done. Do more with less, be efficient, make stuff. So these are all in the ballpark that what most people think of when they think of productivity. And these are not wrong. However, I'm going to argue, at least to a certain degree and for the moment, to just throw it all away. That productivity planner, just throw it away right now. Sort of for now. So everything I just talked about, scratch it. That's not quite where we're at yet, and I want to explain why. these are all wonderful tools. What I just threw on the ground, which is actually, now you can see the back has a magnet. You can actually put it on your refrigerator, keep track of your productivity planning right there as you're getting your meals ready. It's actually a pretty good one. But what I'm going to argue for in this presentation with the help of Mike Rowe and Ayn Rand is that these tools are helpful, but they come way downstream of what's most important about productivity, what's most fundamental to it, and why. You might use all of these tools, as Stephen was suggesting we possibly could, to actually do destructive things. You could create products you despise and use these tools to more efficiently create a life you absolutely hate. Oh, that was a great productivity planner idea you had. No, I really hate my life. Right, so how many of you recognize either one of these guys? Yeah, and hopefully if you're under the age of 30. Okay, so Thelma, who? Yes, a comedian from about 100 years ago. Charlie Chaplin. Yeah, Charlie Chaplin in a movie called Modern Times, where he was basically like a cog in a machine, and you can see him there working on an assembly line, looking kind of disenchanted, alienated perhaps. So you could feel like you're in the grind of something, and you're being more efficient about grinding out the stuff. Or Ron Livingston on the other side. Rodrigo, did you recognize which one? Chaplin. Okay, so you recognize Charlie Chaplin. So only Richard recognized Livingston. This is from a movie called Office Space, which is, if you have not seen the movie Office Space and you want to understand why so many people have bad connotations with work, it captures all the stereotypes about working in an office building for a company called Initech, which has to, and what they do in Initech, a lot of you may not know this, but before the year 2000, there was the Y2K problem for computer programming, because there are only 2 digits that they had put into the computer program, 99, and they hadn't, if they had just put a place for 4 digits, they thought, oh no, our computer systems are gonna crash. Everything that's online in the entire globe is gonna go offline, and ballistic missiles are gonna fly. It'll be nuclear meltdown because we had 2 digits instead of 4 digits. It's the Y2K problem. So the movie's about this company that's supposed to solve the Y2K problem. And everybody in this company hates working there. So you could be incredibly productive in the conventional sense, efficient, doing more with less, and your boss is like, you're going to get a 15-cent an hour pay raise because you do more with less. You're the employee of the week. And you're like, oh, whoopee, I hate my job. I hate Mondays. And actually there's a funny line in the movie where he wonders out loud to his friend, what would you do if you had $1 million? And some of his friends come up with different things. A friend of his says, I would invest it. He goes, you know what I would do? Absolutely nothing. And I would love it. So his goal, he hates work so much he'd rather do nothing than work at Initech. So this is why I think productivity planners and these more efficient systems are way downstream, because if you use them to create products you hate and ending up with a life that you hate, right, you're exacerbating the alienation and resentment that a lot of people already feel about working. So that ends up showing us that all the productivity hacks in the world can't help you find your why. Why are you working? What is work? So this is going to be setting us up for the session for today. This is our roadmap. And what I'd like us to set aside, I literally set aside the productivity planner. But we're going to peel back to deeper layers of the nature of productivity, being productive, producing things. And first we're going to see what Mike Rowe says about the nature of what he calls honest work. And then we're going to go even deeper with the help of Ayn Rand by seeing what she says about the nature of the self, who is doing the work, as well as the self who's producing values. And this is going to help set us up for some writing and discussion prompts a little bit later. We're going to spend a whole section just on something in particular that we'll do a deep dive on. Before I go into part one, how many people in here are familiar with Mike Rowe? 1, 2, 3. Okay, everybody over 30. I'll just say a couple of, that's all right. I'm not surprised. Mike Rowe is most famous for being a television show host. He had created a very popular television show called Dirty Jobs. And originally it was to honor his grandfather, who was kind of a jack of all trades, who built their family's farmhouse, who had built the church their family went to on Sundays, who knew how to fix plumbing and do electrical work. And Mike Rowe really looked up to his grandfather, and he wanted to create this TV series that honored him. And he wanted to call it Somebody's Gotta Do It. However, the TV network said, no, we want dirty jobs. We wanted to focus on the kind of dirty jobs that other people won't do. And he said, okay, I could do that. And then later he did Somebody's Gotta Do It. So he did Dirty Jobs for like 8 years. And then when that was wildly popular and he realized he could set his own terms, he created this other television show called Somebody's Gotta Do It, which really focused on what he regarded as the unsung heroes who do all these bajillions of jobs every day that make our civilization possible. All the things we might take for granted, we don't know how it gets there, or how the services get created or done, who takes care of stuff when it breaks down. It was people like my grandfather. I want the world to learn about these kinds of people. But first he had to do dirty jobs, and it attracted a certain kind of attention, and it was really fascinating, focusing on people who would work in sewer systems. You like to flush it, you don't like to think about where it goes and how it works. But believe me, if you had to use an outhouse, you'd certainly start caring about having a sewer system. Right? How many of you have used an outhouse? On camping, or you go in the woods. Okay, maybe if you're embarrassed, you don't really want to talk about doing that kind of thing. And yet, you know that there are certain kinds of problems that could emerge from that. So that's just one tiny example of the kinds of things he helped people learn about. It takes a lot to have a functioning sewer system for greater sanitation. The lovely thing of not having a stinky house, right? Of having to go and clean the latrine, right? To clean out an outhouse. Right? There are things to take care of. And if you can understand the kind of honest work some people do. So I just wanted to fill you in, since I had a feeling that a lot of people might not be familiar with his work. But this is what really motivated him. This is what put him on the map. And he has like over 6 million followers on Facebook. He has a massive social media following. So if you don't know who he is, he's worth taking a look into. Okay, so on to Mike Rowe. We'll start with him because he's very clear in his message. Work is not the enemy. There is honest work, whether you want to call it white-collar work. This is a financial sector, people on Wall Street or finance, versus blue-collar work, people who work doing manual labor, although it takes a lot of mental power to do that kind of work really well. Right? You're never just moving your hands, you're engaging your mind when you do it. So his point is, whether you call it white-collar work or blue-collar work, ultimately what there is honest work done well or poorly. Have your pick. You want to do it well, or do you want to do it poorly? And so this is what he wants to shine a light on with the kind of work that he was doing in the TV shows. Among his other endeavors, he founded something called the Mike Rowe Works Foundation in 2008, which he founded to spark interest in the skilled trades. Because he said, there are actually millions of jobs out there in what's called the skilled trades, whether it's carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, knowing how to operate a Caterpillar. So there's construction on campus. There are people who have to operate all kinds of things from forklifts to, moving dirt around and, drilling into the ground, people who have to operate all kinds of equipment or maintain the equipment when it breaks down. There are millions of jobs out there. And so he wanted to give people the opportunity, whether you're right out of high school or college and want to go right into the workforce like that, or for people who pivot later in life and want to change careers. And they're like, well, actually, maybe I do want to try my hand at welding. That seems like an intriguing thing to learn about, and maybe what can I do with this? And he actually raises millions of dollars in scholarships to help people do this, get these jobs or to transition at some point in life, whether due to they have a midlife crisis or they get laid off from one job. There's a lot of opportunities out there to help pivot and retrain people. People who sign up for the MicroWorks Foundation and work with them for retraining or getting into these jobs, he asks them to sign the Sweat Pledge, which is an acronym for skills and work ethic aren't taboo. So he says, look, if you're willing to relearn skills and to work hard, it's time to get sweaty in more ways than one. So he has them sign on to the Sweat Pledge, and you can look this up online, what the details of them are. I'm going to generalize about the 12 principles of the Sweat Pledge that has to do with choosing work and working hard and working smart. So generally that's what the principles amount to. And he does ask people to sign on to them, understanding what they're getting into. Like we're investing in you to help make these transformations. It's that important. And if you're committed, then go ahead and sign up and you take it from there. One of the principles that's fundamental to a few points on the Sweat Pledge is the role played by choice. It says, first of all, you have to take personal responsibility for your life and for your work. If you're willing to take that personal responsibility, that's a foundational point. There's another thing you can choose, your attitude. It says you can choose the attitude of gratitude and be grateful for the opportunity to work. There are some people who live in cultures or places or have certain debilitating conditions that severely restrict their ability to work or what they're allowed to work at. Imagine having millions of different opportunities at your fingertips. You're kind of spoiled for choice. So he says, be grateful for those opportunities. And even more fundamentally, you can choose, once you have gotten your foot in the door with one of the opportunities, you can choose to become indispensable. Are you going to be the person who pitches in to bust down tables when there's a line at the door and the busboy's busy in another section? Or are you going to be somebody who just says, yeah, I'm just going to do the minimum. Yeah, that's not my job. You could choose that. Let's see who's going to have that job longer and make more money at it and have happier customers to work with. Because I tell you, having been in the customer service industry, you do not want grouchy customers who are hangry. They are hungry and angry by the time they sit down if they got to wait too long and the table's not that clean and there is somebody with a bad attitude waiting on the table. Right? So are you going to be that person who's going to create negative energy around the situation, or are you going to be somebody who's going to help make it be elevated? You have a choice. You could do that. And if you don't want to be somebody who's working for the man, you could have the choice to start your own business. I think there's somebody here who's recently started his own business, maybe more than one. You told me just yesterday, Rodrigo, you started a business. Would you like to say a little bit about it?
Well, it's just a record store, like an old record store, vintage record.
Oh, just a record store of vintage records, which I love. I have vinyl, by the way, so I actually love that. There's no just a store, no just a record. When you're starting your own business, it's a lot of work, as I'm sure you know by now. So whether it's small scale or large scale, when you make the choice to become an entrepreneur and not work for somebody else's vision, that's a whole other level of choosing. And I saw you smile. Gabrielle, do you also have a business? Yes. Not yet. But I know some of you aspire to, and some of you want to do big startups.
Some business activities like buying and selling out.
Yep. Okay, so so some of you would already aspire to seizing the reins of choice to that level, and so it's a lot of work. It's a big commitment, but without choosing, you're not going to get yourself into that sort of position. So this is one of his fundamental principles in the Sweat Pledge. He has a funny story, Mike Rowe, when in his high school, or in the guidance counselor's office, there was a poster on the wall that said, work smart, not hard, which Mike Rowe absolutely hated. And so he created a counter poster. So the on the right side is what was originally on the poster, and he pasted a picture of himself looking sad with a college degree, a diploma in his hand, over the other half of the poster, and changed it to work smart and hard. So we've seen a bit about the role that choice plays in working hard. You can choose to work hard. You can choose to work your butt off to get ahead. You can choose your attitude about work or towards the work you're taking. You can choose at what level you're going to work, more or less, and for yourself or for somebody else. And look for those work opportunities. But there's also really important to mention that has to do with all the other Sweat Pledge principles, working smart. You can work really hard and actually not be very successful. So what is it to work smart? On his view, there's these various points are going to take you through, or what really amount, on his view, to working smartly. And he starts with lifelong learning. Sometimes people think Mike Rowe's like, nobody should go to college, all colleges should shut down. He says, no, that's not true. For what some people want to do, and I'm one of them, I went to graduate school, I have a PhD in philosophy, and I am very happy with my choice. It's not the only kinds of skill set that I got. So there are some people, like, given what they want to do, I had always wanted to be a teacher since I was 5 years old. Didn't know what I wanted to teach until I went to grad school and changed my major yet again, yes, in graduate school, and decided to be a philosophy professor. So some people, that's their trajectory. He said, that's not the only dignified way to learn. It's not the only learning opportunity. Like you get the diploma and then suddenly you can stop learning now. No, now you've positioned yourself to learn how to learn and to be willing to keep learning. And a lifelong learner knows that you can learn by apprenticeships and mentorships, internships, work with people older than you, sometimes younger than you. Who's to say that the older guy in the picture isn't learning something from these kids about robotics? How many of you have had your parents come to you and say, how do you convert a PDF to it? Yeah, so you're schooling them, right? They're still learning. It doesn't matter where you are in your life. And another thing Rowe is fond of saying is library cards are free. Go to the library, go watch YouTube videos, tutorials, learn how to do stuff all of your life. This is going to position you to seize the opportunities that come up along the way. Also, he doesn't like the mantra, follow your bliss. Yeah, so I see you nodding. And he goes, well, there's nothing completely wrong about following your bliss until it doesn't pay the bills. So he says, guess what? You have to then look at what are the opportunities. How much of your bliss can you pursue and make a living at, but bring your passion with you. You could discover that you absolutely love to do something you had no idea about earlier in life. You thought, oh, no, this is what I'm going to do. I only like to do these 3 things. That's a really constrictive view of who you are and who you potentially could be. If you keep the possibilities open for learning new stuff, as long as you bring your passion with you and throw it into the learning process, you may discover a new bliss. You'll be like, whoa, the thing I thought I wanted, oh my goodness, careful what you wish for, because that didn't work out too well and I really don't like it. But you learned how to do this other thing and you lean into it and you love it. So this also allows you to pivot and retrain. It's not fun getting laid off from work. I was laid off of a job a couple of years ago, something I thought I wanted to do, and actually ended up being a blessing in disguise because it freed me up to do more things like this so that I could actually travel and work. And like next month, I don't know how many of you are going to be in Nairobi, Kenya next month for Students for Liberty. I'm going to be one of your instructors. So yes. So, but I wouldn't have had that opportunity like this or the one in Nairobi next month if I had still been with that job, which was like 60 or 70 hours a week, and I could not have traveled the way that I am now. So I was like, okay, let me learn a new skill set, get flexible. And that is what Rowe calls closing the willingness gap, to close the skills gap. You have to be willing to say, I am not necessarily entitled to this particular job. I'm not necessarily entitled to do work that I think is clean work. I'm only going to get a white-collar job because, like this, I could not believe this. There was this, I don't have a TikTok account, but somebody told me there's this girl on TikTok who was, making these videos about rage quitting her job. And she's like, yeah, I didn't go to college for 4 years just to, be a waitress. And I was like, oh, don't you diss waitresses. So, because there are some people who do it for a living and they actually enjoy it. There are people who go into the restaurant business and they are specifically servers at tables because they want to bring hospitality experience. They don't think of it as like, I'm serving food, I'm doing something beneath me. They elevate their work. They bring their best self to and elevate the work. That willingness to think about work differently helps you close the skills gap because there are millions of jobs out there that a lot of people won't do. They feel entitled to certain kinds of jobs because, well, that's what I got my degree in. And that's kind of like the bad attitude of, and then you're limiting yourself. Richard asked a question earlier about the psychology of this sort of view toward work or business. And I think it's a difference between what's called a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A growth mindset says, I want to be an expansive self. I kind of Walt Whitman, I contain multitudes. What can't I do? Let's try to meet that challenge. What can't I do? And see what have you got in you? And what might you love doing? And you can really surprise yourself, the possibilities that come. If you're only willing to entertain that you're more than just these 2 or 3 things. I only like playing the oboe, or I want to, run a railroad like Dagny Taggart, and that's nice. There's nothing wrong with wanting to help, run the operations of a railroad company. Great if you love it and there's the opportunity. But if you say that's what I'm going to go to school for and that's the only thing I'm willing to do, you really limited your opportunities in life and you probably set yourself up for failure. So this is all part of Mike Rowe's view about getting sweaty. So what are the benefits? Why do this? These are the benefits that Rowe, and I gather Rowe's views not just from his TV shows. He actually writes weekly columns on his Facebook page, and he also has a book called Profoundly Disconnected, where he's gathered together some of his brief essays that he's published, as well as added a new commentary. And profoundly disconnected means we are so disconnected from the reality of how things come into existence in the world. We don't give them the respect they're due, and we treat everything as though it fell off a tree. They're like, this didn't fall off a tree. This didn't fall off a tree. This certainly didn't fall off a tree. I have not seen an iPhone tree, have you? Okay, so the stuff got here somewhere, from somewhere, and we're going to dig into that more deeply when we go into Rand's work. So the rewards of getting sweaty, on his view, it builds your character so that you become the kind of person who can do things like his grandfather. You achieve deep satisfaction of doing challenging work. This is why when people work for decades to go to the Olympics, right? No pain, no gain. They work so hard just to shave milliseconds off of a running time. That's a lot of work over a lot of time. It takes a lot of dedication. Why? Well, if I ran a race against a bunch of kindergartners and said, I won, I was like, yeah, that was easy. Right? You're an adult with long legs. Of course you're going to win. Big whoop. You're really pinning your self-esteem on that. It's like the satisfaction of achievement comes from working really hard to achieve something difficult in a competitive pool of people who are trying to do the same thing. You will never get that deep satisfaction of looking at the gold medal you won at the Olympics. I did that. Nobody can take that away from you, and only you can give it to you. So he makes a lot about that being a deep reward of getting sweaty. And then, of course, to the others, when you need to make a living, you'll be successful and financially secure if you undertake the sweat pledge. That helps you thrive and not to survive. And he goes, and by the way, you'll be pretty happy if you've done all that. And what is life about but happiness? So that's Rowe in a nutshell. But we're going to go deeper. So Rowe says a lot about honest work and about why this is good to do and what you have to invest of yourself into it to have a good life. But there are other questions to ask about work. And with respect to Ayn Rand, what she has we're actually going to do some metaphysics and we're going to do some ethics. She's going to take us to a deeper level because she's going to ask us, why do we need to work? Rose, I've just told you, he talked a lot about honest work and having a good attitude toward work and being in a position to take on all kinds of work. But why do we need to do work? And the title of the presentation is The Virtue of Productivity. So why do we need to work? What makes productivity a virtue? And centrally, both of these are going to be connected together by being value producers. And here's where we're going to go into some metaphysics. I'll make this as clear and concise as possible. This begins with the nature of life. Life is conditional. What does that mean? We're mortal. What does that mean? So what does that mean? Life is conditional and that we're mortal. You might think this is an obvious thing, but go ahead and say what you think is the obvious.
If we do nothing, we'll die.
Yeah, if we do nothing, you could die. So being mortal means you can die. And clearly, if you do nothing, how many of you know the Herman Melville story, Bartleby the Scrivener? Wow, only half a person, 1.5 people. Okay, so Herman Melville didn't just write Moby Dick. He also wrote a famous story or novella, Bartleby the Scrivener, among other things. Well, Bartleby, I bring him up because, and this is why sometimes literature courses are really great. Actually, I think they're always really great. But you dig into a psychological profile of a character, and Bartleby the Scrivener is somebody who continually said, I prefer not to. Whenever he was asked to do something, he said, I prefer not to. And ultimately, sorry, this is a spoiler, but actually reading this story, you'll dig into what was going on here, and it's meant to provoke thought. So sorry about the spoiler. It's still worth reading. When he says, I prefer not to, what is the ultimate upshot of that? If you prefer not to do anything.
You prefer not to live.
You prefer not to live. Taking that to its logical conclusion is you just sit in a corner and die. So you have to act. Life is action. Any action? Now we got action on the table. What action should you do?
You're stuck with actions that the human body allows you to perform for stuff.
Okay, and we're going to get to that in the next slide, but we're stuck with the human actions the body can perform, right? So there's a limitation on what can be done. If I say, I'm going to jump 100 feet up in the air, Superman did that, why can't I? You're laughing because that's ridiculous. I'm not a character in a movie. Right, so I'm not a superhuman. I'm only human. But that's a lot. Right, so there are constraints. What else? So you can't do anything. You got to do something or you'll die. Can't do anything because then that's not compatible with being what you are. Still got a lot of actions you could take. Tell me one action I shouldn't take if my goal is not to die. What would you say? Oh, don't kill myself. Okay, that's an action. I won't, I promise. That is, I know people who struggled with that. I have never been tempted to, so don't worry, it ain't gonna happen. But that is an action I could take. And we can see very clearly the immediate consequences of that. So that's an action you say, Biondi, don't do that. And there might be some other things too. But this points to the mortality point, right? So you need to act, living beings need to act, or they could die. So if you don't act, death is gonna happen. If you do act, death might happen. So you have to be careful about what actions are taken, right? Because if you want to live and not die, that's what conditionality is. If this, then that. If this, then not that, right? So we're conditional. So we need to do stuff in order to live. All living beings do, not just us. I have this picture on here for a reason because there are 3 different types of living beings. There are human beings, there's a dog being, and there's plant beings. They're all conditional. They all could die if they're not in the conditions, the habitat that is going to foster their ability to live. And so Rand argues that this is why life makes the concept of value possible. If you really understand the nature of what it is to be alive, then you understand that we're conditional, live or die, live or die. Every action has the consequence, will you continue to live or will you die? And you might be in an intermediate condition of being ill or sick on the route toward dying, but it's going to be one path or the other. You want to stay in or go out? Stay in or go out? Choice is up to you. At least it is for us, and I'll get to that in a moment. But things are valuable only for mortal entities. Life makes the concept of value possible. So all living beings have to pursue values to stay in existence. And this is where we have to bring in, well, there are different kinds of living beings. The nature of the kind of living being is what determines how it ought to act. This is where Rand says she moves right from an is to an ought. She argues for this in her essay, The Objectivist Ethics, in the Virtue of Selfishness collection. It's her clearest statement of her foundational ethical position, and it's grounded in biocentrism, right? That you have a system of morality grounded in the biology of living beings. So what's good for a dog is not the same thing as what's good for the plants in the field, and it's not the same thing as what's good for a human. Right? There'll be different conditions that will foster their flourishing or could kill them. Like, I don't know whether this is an old wives' tale or whatnot, but I've been told, don't feed dogs chocolate. It's toxic. I don't know whether that's true. I should have fact-checked it. But I have had dog owners tell me, you know, when they see people in the building want to feed their dogs, and I'm like, they monitor, like, dogs can't eat certain things that humans can. Like, but you can feed me chocolate. You can leave it right up here on the table. And plants can't digest and metabolize chocolate, so that's kind of useless for them. All right, so you have to take into account the nature of the being, what's going to foster it not only living, but hopefully flourishing, to use a botanical metaphor, right? Do you want like a wilty kind of rose, or do you want a really fully blooming rose? Do you want to just kind of like wake up, go through your day, or would you like to go through the day energized, bursting with creative energy? So there are different things you have to do to get from the merely like kind of getting by, surviving, to really thriving. And that same thing holds for every species. And so the ultimate value is going to be life, and a different standard of value for a different type of being. And the standard of value could be the ultimate value of life as a kind of being, whether as plants or dogs or humans. And for each one of those, so there's the category of humans, dogs, plants, but for each and every individual human, each and every individual dog, and each and every plant, its purpose is its own life. It's working, doing, whether consciously or not, right? Because I'm not going to say that plants can think, at least not to my awareness, even if you've watched Little Shop of Horrors and there's the man-eating plant. That's just fiction. So whether it's doing it consciously to pursue those values or to being in existence as itself, as the kind of thing it is, or it's pursuing it kind of automatically or instinctively, right? Plants, it's automatic. If it's in the conditions, right, roots are going to drop water. If the sun's shining, it's going to photosynthesize, right? It's not going to, a daisy doesn't sit there and be like, do I want to turn over and get a tan on my back? Right? It's not doing that sort of thing. Or the dog's not going to go, yeah, I think I'm going to go on a diet this week, so I'm going to cut back on the dog food. I've never seen a dog walk away from a dog food bowl. So there's more, there's not so much choice there with certain kinds of beings, but each one's trying to stay in existence as itself, right? It's not trying to go out of existence, except for the strange case of some humans. And we're going to take a look at human nature. Richard mentioned human nature earlier. So human nature and values. Human nature is that we are biological entities. I'm using this phrase very specifically, with sensation and perception, and we essentially have volitional, rational, and conceptual consciousness. That's a whole lot of big philosophy words. Rand talks about what makes a kind of being essentially what it is, but that doesn't mean that that's all we are. We're biological entities, we're physical systems, and she just like actually Aristotle way before her, makes the case that we have some things in common with the plants in the field from the previous slide. We all have to take in nutrition and metabolize to live. But that's where the similarity with plants stops. With non-human animals, they have sensation and perception. Right? If you were to, kick a dog, please don't do it, it would wince in pain. And if it sees something in the distance, whether it detects whether it's friend or foe, right? Is it its owner, or is it an opportunity to get like a snack? If it's a rabbit, I've seen dogs run after rabbits. It's going to do that because it can perceive and move as a result of the perception, unlike plants. Plants don't get up and say, I want to go get water from that puddle. I haven't seen a hopping plant, but animals can hop over. We share that in common with non-human animals, though. But then we have this other layer, which it has to do with human consciousness. Volition means we can choose. We have free will. Rational, we can think. Conceptual, we learn. And this has to do with words, language, forming concepts, so that you won't have to say that. And if I say, get me that, you're like, what? Which that? But if everything's a that, language breaks down. I have trouble keeping track of 3 that's, no less 50 million that's. If you can abstract conceptually This is a very, very brief crash course in philosophy of language on Rand's view. We have one word for these kinds of things. It's called book. I would like to write a book, and then I can tell you what the book is about, or I want to read a book, which one. But the concept book is a light year leap in terms of what our amazing consciousness can do. We forget how long ago we learned how to conceptualize our world, how powerful it is to conceptualize at higher and higher levels of abstractions like we are doing right now. What we store inside of us, connecting the past with the present into the future and to plan to start up a business, to plan for your future. It's the immensity of what this kind of consciousness can do it's amazing, I think. And so Rand really draws this out as well. That's our nature. Earlier, you had mentioned, well, there are constraints of what we can't do. Well, we have to know what we are so we can figure out what we can do, right? And to what we can and can't do. There are certain things that will not serve us, and there are certain things that will serve us. The things that will serve us are values, the things we seek to gain and or keep. And what's of ultimate value is human life, but that's super abstract. Like, yeah, I'm pursuing being alive. Like, okay, we're all doing that. Like that, what does that mean to you? And Rand disentangles that into 3 general buckets: reason, purpose, and self-esteem. And reason is our faculty of thinking, which helps us conceptualize and to think and to plan and to come up with language, represent the world to ourselves. It's a faculty that we have. Purpose is just to, it's the ends or aims that you're seeking to achieve. So having a purpose in your life. And if you say, my purpose is living, well, yeah, and that's kind of broad. So what is life but filled with a whole bunch of sub-purposes that constitute that? So what are those purposes? And there are different subcategories of purposes that you pursue, whether it's your vocation, relationships, hobbies, sports. You know, what are your categories of purposes to pursue? And then they'll be very specific to you. So life is the moral standard, but you're just like what we saw in the previous slide, your own life is your purpose, to live your life and be happy. And that's also a broad word. So happiness, just like life, is constituted by a constellation of values. And I'm going to have a lot to say later in the week when we talk about, I present on friendship and then the meaning of life, about the texture of what that can look like. But so just to suffice it to say here, this may sound very broad and abstract, but it's meant to be shorthand for capturing a constellation of things that constitute your life, and that only you can know what that's about. So value pursuit. There are different ways of getting values and pursuing values. And Rand argues that not just any old way will do. A really effective, perhaps we could call it efficient or productive way of pursuing values is to identify and cultivate virtues. Virtues are how you act to gain and or keep your values. Rand ultimately has what she says are 7 virtues. 3 of them are most fundamental. Rationality is the method of thinking, and Professor Hicks is going to have a lot more to say about that when he presents on objectivity. So I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, other than learning how to think carefully as a method will help you achieve the contents of your developing your reasoning faculty properly and to stock it properly, so that you can then go out into what she calls rationality, the virtue that is a preconditioned virtue for doing productive work. This is why you learn skills before you go out into a job, because you have to think and learn and stock your consciousness with building up, do they call it social capital? Right? The wealth of your mind and your skill sets and your ideas and your knowledge. Human capital. Human capital, you're cultivating that to go out into the productive world, whether it's through mentoring or apprenticing in a trade or going to college and earning a degree. You got a lot to learn before you're ready to fully throw yourself into a particular position. And that also involves 4 other virtues connected to rationality: being independent, reaching your conclusions by your own mind, so that you understand why you believe what you do and you have grounds for believing it. These are all like reality-faced virtues. Integrity. When you reach those conclusions, are you going to live by them? Or be so scared by what other people think that you're going to capitulate and compromise? So are you going to be a person of integrity and live the conclusions you've reached or not? Honesty. Don't fake reality. Don't fudge your results, they say in the science lab experiments. Justice. When somebody's done something good, you tell them. And you reward them by commending them. If they've done something wrong, tell them. Wag your finger, or if it's a really bad thing they've done, you may have to take them into the court system. Yeah, I didn't really appreciate that you ran over my grandmother, right? So on purpose, right? That is, it's escalated from manslaughter to premeditated murder, right? So that's justice. Giving people, right, the praise or blame that they have earned by their actions. And that's being real, not sugarcoating it, not being silent, but actually justly rewarding somebody for the good or bad that they've done in the world. On to productiveness, which is really the linchpin virtue, I'm going to argue, in Rand's view. So now you've stocked your human capital with all the goods to go out into the world of productive work. That's the work you're going to be undertaking as the central purpose of your life, and Rand argues that's going to help you organize the rest of your time. So in order to earn and make your living, to produce the values of living, we could even call productiveness the work of living. And I'm going to dig into a bit what's involved in that on her view. In order to do that, that will help you order the rest of your life. So you plan your other activities around making your living. Right? If I say, you know what, I would really like to, indulge my beachcombing hobby. Like I like collecting seashells. Now, if I make that my highest purpose to pursue, my landlady is not going to be too happy when I can't pay the rent, right? So if I keep my value priorities in place and I productively achieve that, that'll help me order all the other things that I want in my life. I can still make time to collect seashells, just not 40, 50 hours a week, right? It's just the numbers don't add up if you think about it that way. And another thing that may sound odd to call it virtue is pride. What does pride get you? Rand argues that it's the value of self-esteem, of holding yourself worthy to live, and you are capable of living. Where you can look out into the world and say, I did that. She calls virtue morally ambitious living. It's when you live your life in such a way that you are, she calls it, a being of self-made soul. I am proud to create myself to whatever extent I can have control over that, right? This is not, I didn't want her view to be confused with, I can do anything I want in the universe. No, I can't. I can't jump 100 feet in the air. There's lots of constraints. But the point here is that you do need to do a lot of work and feel like you're capable of it and you are worthy of living if you're ambitious about becoming a certain kind of person. That's pride. You take pride in yourself. Maybe you've heard a phrase that way. How come you're like being sloppy with this? You just turn in something half-assed. What, do you don't take any pride in your work? Do you don't think you're worth the results of doing a job well done? Or do you say, no, I want my life to be the best. I'm going to live up to it. And the standards, when they come from you, that's incredibly empowering when you approach it that way. So the nature of virtue is to figure out what ways of being are going to help me get my values in my life so that I can live well and flourish and succeed and have all the wonderful stuff that comes with pursuing values in a certain sort of way. And there are specific virtues, she argues, are going to be helpful for getting us there. A lot of times people hear, oh, virtues, isn't that an old-fashioned term? I'm virtuous. I'm like some pious old little lady. Like, I'm virtuous more than you are. That's not how she thinks about them. Virtues are only good ways of being if they get real values. If not, throw them away. Otherwise, those are like fake virtues, right? And people who are pretending to be virtuous are going to pursue virtues that don't yield any value. Virtues serve values. Very important to keep that distinction in mind for her. So I want to dig a little bit more into the virtue of productiveness before I start teaching you into some of the conversation more deeply. Just to reiterate, on her view, productiveness is the work undertaken as the central purpose to help you organize your life and prioritize your values. I call it the work of living. And she refers to production as the application of reason to the problem, there's that word again, Bill, the problem of survival. That's a problem I'm glad I have. I get the opportunity to live. That is an awesome problem to have to face. How do I live? That's what this view is meant to solve. How do I live? And she calls it a problem of survival. Well, humans need to create. You could say that create is a synonym for produce. Sometimes people think, are you a producer? Like somebody who makes something in particular? Or rather than being creative? Well, when you create something, you might be creating a new idea. Maybe you're reaching for a new conception of what is business. Maybe you're creating a new, better version of smartphones. Maybe you're creating something, you have something in mind we have no concept for yet because it's so new and you're reaching for it. Well, we're pretty clear about creating material values, putting food and beverages in our body, clothes on our backs. There's something I'm going to help dive into with you over the next few days about what it means to create spiritual values. And Rand thinks we need both because we have a certain kind of consciousness. We're volitional, rational, conceptual in our natures. We're able to think and represent the world to ourselves. We have emotional lives. Right? There are dimensions to us. We're not a purely reductionistic blob of matter. We have to attend to that dimension of our being. So there are spiritual values, and this is where pride falls. Having a sense of pride falls under spiritual values. In addition to creating material ones to keep body and soul together, you could say. And here's where I think Rand is at her most Mike Rowean, if you want to call it that. She underscores that productive work is a process by which man's mind sustains his life. This is capitalism, using the mind to live. It's not the unfocused performance of just going through motions, like you're a cog in a machine. Right? You have a mind who chose to do some motions, whether it's incredibly interesting or not is another question. And you can choose to do this in any line of rational endeavor, great or modest, on any level of ability. And this is Rowe's point when he says, don't you disparage blue-collar work or manual labor. That's honest work, and it takes a mind in a human being to do that well or poorly. You have the choice. So productive work is when you move forward into solving the problem of survival by using your mind to produce the material and spiritual values that you need to live. And that can be done on levels great or small. There's no better or worse here. It's, are you bringing your best self to the problem of living, or are you not? No matter what you do in life, whether you're a sanitation worker, a teacher, an electrician, fill in the blank. Bring your best self to that. And that's where she's most deeply connected to Rowe and honest work. But you can see she's got a lot of metaphysics and some ethical theory deeply below that surface of the nature of honest work. All right. I want to take a dive into those two kinds of values. Material values. This is the easier one. We'll do some fun stuff with spiritual values in a couple of minutes. These material values, is it a mystery box? I did say before, and you laughed when I said, how many of you see these growing on trees or falling out of the sky? You laughed because that's not how they come to be. So you tell me, you tell the rest of us, how did these material values enter the world? Any of them?
Raw materials put together, bulk production.
Okay, so putting different materials together and working to produce, okay? So pick any one of these four, whether a coat, a smartphone, a meal on a table, or a house. What's involved in materially producing any of those?
I'll take the meal.
Okay, the meal.
So there's veggies, ground oil, pepper, salt, the table, the plates, hard work, the fire.
Wow, okay. You didn't, so you didn't notice just the food. The food is served on a plate, on a table. And you mentioned spices, right? So there's vegetables so that you can season it. There are certain things you have to rearrange in the world to get it there. What else? How many of you like to cook? You mentioned seasoning. Okay. Say a little bit about seasoning and seasoning food.
Seasoning food. Since I'm Brazilian, we use a lot of garlic, and olive oil.
As an Italian, I approve of both of those, garlic and olive oil. Okay. Okay, so what do you do with the garlic and olive oil?
Firstly, we, how can I say, we toast the garlic using the olive oil.
Toast the garlic with the olive oil. This is knowledge about food science. Okay, and where does olive oil come from, by the way? Okay, olives. Okay, so that jar of golden honey called olive oil comes from. Oh, that was fair enough. It was an ambiguously asked question. So how does olive oil come into existence? So yeah, geographically they are grown in different places.
Yeah. The ones we use in Brazil come from the south.
Okay, come from the south of Brazil. Others come from Greece, some places in Italy, right? There are different geographical Spanish olives, right? And so you get the olives, and how does it go from the brown, black, or green olives into that golden honey in the jar? Yes, you have to press it, right? There's a process. Oh my gosh. So there's skills, you have to work. It's a different kind of work. So there's food science of seasoning food. There's getting the vegetables on the table. We're going to talk about the vegetables in a second. So, and you mentioned, and so there's all kinds of other things involved. What's an olive press? Oh my gosh, somebody's got to build an olive press. Holy cow. There's all kinds of jobs involved, objects, processes, knowledge, science. Oh my goodness gracious. Just to put food on the table. There are activities to do, scientific principles about garlic and olives to learn about, right? To make a simple meal, right? Not easy. So it's more than just planting seeds in the ground or going out into the garden and pulling the vegetables out. You have to know how to prepare the food. And then, that person she's got a wheelbarrow. Where did that come from? But we can go on, and I'm not going to belabor it. This is Leonard Read's I Pencil. Okay, so for those of you familiar with the economic story about how a pencil comes into existence, it just unfolds like the whole economic system about the rearranging the material stuff in the world, learning how to do that, the physical properties of things, the knowledge that it takes to develop, to iterate on a product in different versions to continually improve. Transportation, you said the south of Brazil, correct? How did it get from there up to other parts of Brazil? Right? It could be somebody put them in a bushel and walked. That would take a long time. Or maybe a truck. Oh my goodness, how does a truck, we could go on and on. It's massive and amazing and interdependent systems. And this was the easy set of values to produce. We're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about, before we get to spiritual values, Rand talks about alternatives in the material domain. I've been talking about material value production with your help. There are other ways to get material values. But can I have some coffee? Or ask politely, you don't have to beg. You could steal, right? Whether it's shoplifting surreptitiously, you don't want anybody to find, or just hold somebody up and say, I want broccoli in the shopping cart right now because I got toasted garlic at home waiting for me. Right? So I could get food on the table by producing it and being part of that exchange system. I could beg for it. I could steal to get it. Well, these are alternatives. What do you think about the others? We've been talking about producing. Rand talks about producing, creating, exchanging to get material values. She clearly does not argue for these other approaches. They are ways to get stuff. What do you think about getting material stuff those ways?
Well, begging's not reliable and you're totally dependent on someone else.
Okay, two things against begging. It's not reliable. You can sit out there begging all day and people walk by me, giving you coffee, lady. No self-worth. Okay, so because you're relying on other people. You're dependent on them. It's one thing if you're 2 years old and you're like, Mommy, can I have dinner? I'm hungry. Of course. I'm your parent, right? Because you're tiny and you haven't learned all this other stuff to produce things for yourself. You're in a more immature stage of development until you're in a place where you can seize those reins and roast your own garlic, right? If I were 28 and I'm like, Mom, she'd be like, get off your ass and go make make your own peanut butter sandwich, right? So if you don't want it, to be seen as dependent on somebody else, it's very unreliable, which is not cool. It's, because you could die before somebody gives you something, but you don't get that sense of achievement, the sense of self-esteem. Like little kids love to do it for themselves. Like, I think, actually, I don't want to trample on your thunder. There's something you talked about. This is going to come up on Friday, a couple of our conversations on Friday, both on my presentation and Professor Hicks's, about little kids love to say, I do it. Like, if you go to help a little kid put a jacket on, they're going to throw a temper tantrum because they want to do it themselves. This is something that educator Maria Montessori noticed about studying young children. They want to be independent. They want to do things for themselves. And it's partly because they are learning how the world works, how they work. And they want to grow up and be able to do things. That's a healthy sense of self And the way to get self-esteem is by doing the work that's involved in the work of living, of producing the values for yourself. Yes.
This sequence is interesting because if productiveness is a virtue, implication would be the other two are vices, the opposite of virtue, vice.
Yeah.
But also the two, begging is not forcing.
Yes.
Stealing is forcing.
Yes.
Begging has this kind of intermediate.
Yes.
But it strikes me as that's for the reasons already named, dependence and other things. But it's also surviving, not thriving.
Yes.
It is surviving. So there is some level of, I'm not killing myself.
Yes.
But it's not it's not a virtue, right? It's not
Yes.
enough to survive as a human.
Yes.
True human wants to survive and thrive.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, so the person in the middle is like, they are trying to pursue some value. They do want to live. They don't want to die, but they're not as committed to living, like to get up and do the thing. And to be fair to Rand, right, she says there are going to be cases where there are some people who, for whatever chronic conditions they're in, and they cannot physically take care of themselves, right? This is where she thinks the benefits of human habitat, where people may choose to, like, you know, that's unfortunate, and there are a lot of people who will voluntarily support charitable organizations to help people who do want to live, who can't, literally cannot do it for themselves, or to the extent, right, they help position them to maybe get back on their feet after some kind of big tragedy has happened. But that's to see it as a temporary condition, not as a you know, for people to get back on their feet. So you're right, there's that intermediate thing, like there are conditions under which begging might not be bad. They're value pursuing, but you don't want to be in that position for your whole life if you can avoid it. The other side is vice, right? Getting material values through theft and fraud. Bill?
Yeah. So on the positive side, you had a slide there was reason, productivity, and pride. Productivity being over one's lifespan, serving some sort of central purpose sort of thing. And that's, Rand really nails that. That's like amazing. I taught organizational behavior. And the studies they do on that, right? So long-term satisfaction, like that maps onto really well. But people can't remember really always specific instances of being happy and physically pleased. Whereas people who perform short-term things that make you happy, watch TV, eat sweet foods, whatever, they have these momentary great pleasures, but then when they look back on life, they tend to be very dissatisfied. So she's really nailed it on that. I want to be clear on that. But now as we start to stray over to this, and this is always a problem with conceptual formation, I mean, if our worry is about depending on other people, those material values are only material values because the thing that was produced, somebody else wanted. Had not somebody else wanted it, like if you're in McKeesport, and there were houses in McKeesport people walked away from, it's outside of Pittsburgh, steel and tar, right? They are worthless because nobody wants them, nobody wants them. They are material, they are not material values. So the dependence on other people, and with your iPencil story, never goes away. So can you clarify that a little bit more? What kind of dependence might be good? What kind of dependence might not be?
Depending on people, see, this is why begging is not a virtue. It's not a way of being that's going to produce the value of living. And you said something, I'm not sure I entirely tracked your question, so I'm going to ask you to re-ask it in a moment, but I do want to say one thing about, I just lost the thought about the begging example. Go ahead.
No, the reason I prefaced I did is because you know as well as I do, in the philosophy game, people choose one problem, they pick on that, they say, yay, I'm successful on that, so we throw everything out because the author's wrong. And I want to make very clear before doing this, I think there's a lot right. But as we conceptually try to spell it out, I feel like we're stumbling a little bit. Like if the problem with the beggars is they depend on other people, that's throughout the entire economy. You depend on somebody else valuing your work.
Okay, that takes me to something, the way that, let me think about the example I wanted to bring. people didn't even know they wanted a smartphone until it was created. So it wasn't that people were out there wanting a smartphone. There were things that Steve Jobs was envisioning about the power of computing and then transferring it into the palm of your hand, right? That nobody knew, they didn't even know what it was. They just were curious about the product. So you have to produce things that you think are going to be valuable before you can consume anything. You have to produce a self. You're producing yourself and living before you can even take stuff in to keep living. It's a necessary condition. And the thing about when people say interdependent systems, we all depend on each other. Richard, go ahead. I know you're dying to take it away on that.
I just think this way because I don't like the idea of, hey, there's dependence either ways and a division of labor system. The whole point is I specialize in this and I'm highly dependent, selling my stuff to somebody else. I think the difference here is in the capitalist system, the interdependency is reciprocal value for value trading stuff you've produced.
Yes.
In this case, this person is dependent
You're just taking.
else having produced, and that somebody else has to give something for nothing.
Yes.
Why would you rely on people giving something for nothing? In the capitalist system, you rely on people giving you something for something.
There's no exchange here.
See what I mean? Yeah, there's no,
It's just all one way.
what Rand called the trader principle. Now, some people will give. Obviously, they do give. But you're relying on a subset of the population that would give for nothing, for no reason. And
Well,
that's
perhaps.
very different than...
No, I get what you're saying, value for value.
Yeah.
Right, and it's going to depend on how you talk about, because Adam Smith says even the beggar trades off of that. Like the people who give to the beggar, they get in return a feeling that they helped somebody. So even he thought, that's attenuated, but that there's still something there. And, there are a lot of people who perhaps give money or resources to people or organizations that don't immediately give them a material value, but then bring about other values in the world. So, if I want to help the poor, let's say this, it's very misguided because studies have shown that street begging like that's usually for drugs or alcohol. But let's say I wanted to help the poor, then I'm furthering that goal.
Okay, this is where I'm going to leapfrog into the more difficult thing because you're bringing us right into the difficult territory. You thought this part was complex. Wait till we get to spiritual value production. You think that you helped, what you did was a good thing. Perhaps. Thank you for qualifying. I know you're philosophical. You have to qualify all the claims. No universal quantifiers you're throwing out there. So perhaps, but not only perhaps not, likely not, because you didn't just alleviate his need to take in a certain amount of calories if you gave him some food or money for maybe he ended up using to buy drugs, right? Whatever. So he actually it wasn't very helpful for producing value. That was a temporary fix. What would have been, if you were really a humanitarian, what would have been far more beneficial for you to do with respect to that person who is begging for a meal right now? Yeah. Oh, I see you putting a lot of work into the begging thing here. Would you be willing to walk around with, those sandwich signs and advertise for me? Because I'll pay you money for that because I need some advertising, and if I can give you a starting wage, see how you do, like $10 for walking for a couple of hours and then you can buy a lot more food than what I was just going to give you for begging, and now you got a skill, right? I've just employed you, and you just earned your money. You earned a little respect. So I would actually come back and say, you temporarily put a Band-Aid on something that's really like somebody's arm is about to fall off and you put a Band-Aid on it. What's the real value to help that person, right? I don't want to botch the biblical saying. Okay, You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach him how to fish, he can feed himself for a lifetime. So how can you equip somebody to live? It's one thing if like he actually is going to literally like faint right now if he doesn't he'll have something to eat. But you don't want him to die. Potentially there's a lot of value there as a person in an exchange economy. And you're valuing life. And somebody who's a potential like in your human world of being a value creator and pursuer and a potential trader of values. Get him on his feet, but then offer him a job. Or, say, I know a place that helps retrain people. There's this Mike Rowe guy, and he's got scholarships to really set him up for successful living. It's the only way to achieve certain kinds of spiritual values, like peace of mind of not knowing where the next meal is coming from. Achievement. I earned my food and I learned how to cook it. Maybe you just helped somebody become a friend in your life. Or even fall in love with, who knows, right? So you see, spiritual values is the biggest fuel for survival. And material values keep body and soul together, but what keeps a soul in existence? That's going to be a big question for Friday. But she does not neglect the spiritual dimension. And just going back to the begging example, or the stealing example, which is a vice, right? The begging, like Richard pointed out, is an unclear middle position. It's not always bad, not reliable, doesn't get you all the value. It's not value optimizing. It gets you a little bit just to not die. But there's a lot more to life than not dying. Not dying is not living. It's not the same thing. I have friends who, it's their saying. They have T-shirts that say not dying is not living. It's not equivalent. So don't confuse merely surviving or getting by with really living. So what does it take to produce values? We already dove into it a little bit. How to, and this is the difficult part. And this is why responding to your question we had to go through this. What does it take to achieve the spiritual value of self-esteem? What does it take to achieve the spiritual value of friendship and human connection? Right? I could sit somebody in a room next to you and say, there's your best friend. Is that how you make friends? I'm going to talk about that on Thursday. Some of you looked at me with like funny faces when I said that. You're like, that's a little fast. I can't really call him a friend. He just sat next to me. So there's a lot to producing them. It's not as obvious how those come into existence as the way it, and it was not that obvious with material values. We had to dig into it. It's more than just moving objects around in the world. It's with know-how and systems of people and things to learn and activities to do. So producing spiritual values is part of the work of the living, on Rand's view. Now, since we're in our last 3 or 4 minutes of all of this, I was going to have you do a writing exercise. What I will do is give you enough time to write it down. As, oh dear. Before the writing exercise. This was really difficult. When people try to, oh boy, alternatives in the spiritual realm. Instead of doing the hard work of producing spiritual values, people try to get them on the cheap. You really want your romantic relationship to succeed. And so what you do in order to keep grinning and saying, I love my partner, you ignore the fact this person was cheating on you. Stick your head in the sand. That's one way to say, I have a romantic relationship. Yeah, maybe on paper. In spirit, I don't know about that. Or you can cheat or deceive to try to get the spiritual values. If you want to get an A in a class, you could do the hard work of studying and thinking, or you could look on the paper of somebody who's really smart in the class and like copy, get the A in the class, and then keep doing that in your classes, and then get a diploma, and then what? Then what? Can you get spiritual values in any other way but producing them yourself. Can you get them by evading what's out there? Can you get them by cheating? Can you get them by wishful thinking? You kind of dim the light so you can't see the gray hairs. I'm not afraid of looking at my gray hairs because I'm not afraid of them. I'm proud. I'm alive long enough to have gray hair. I'm glad I've got that problem. Richard.
How would you classify people who interpret spirit as religious?
Oh dear, I'm going to talk about that on Friday. That's a big one, and it would take us a long time. So I will be addressing that on Friday when we talk about the meaning of life, because I'm going to talk about secular spirituality there. So it's a great, amazingly excellent question, but now is not the time to start diving into it. So, didn't mean to cut you off so quickly, but we will be addressing that on Friday for sure. Bill.
I'm just going to, and it might actually just be your next slide, but you started out with Simon Sinek's Find Your Why. And we've gone through Rowe. And it seems like then that spiritual element there, pride, self-esteem, one has done something of value, assert their
Interest, goals, whatever, that it seemed to be what it is to find your why. Is that correct?
That's going to be part of the process. And I think the two presentations on Friday go hand in hand with searching for and discovering your why. But that's why, actually, what happened to the productivity planner? Thank you. Because, and if I see a couple people jotting things down, we won't have time right now unless you want to sit here for another 10 or 15 minutes. It's up to you. To do the writing exercise is now that we've journeyed through productivity, production, producing material and spiritual values, you have a much richer vocabulary about the nature of productivity. How do you unleash productivity? Now you have a whole bunch of different concrete examples, of a vast array of them, to think about productivity. If you were to identify one thing that you were seeking to produce, right? If I had asked this question at the beginning, you might have been like, maybe produce a movie, or maybe to produce the next widget, whatever your widget is. Now what is it you would like to produce? Identify it, write it down for yourself. Do you feel blocked in pursuing that value and seeking to produce it? If you do feel blocked, try to write down, figure out why. We've also got a lot of vocabulary around of how much work it takes to produce value. And there could be all kinds of blockers to doing the work. However, some of you might have identified something you're seeking to produce. Remember, create is a synonym for produce. Maybe you're actually really productive on your way to producing that. What do you think accounts for it? So you may be feeling blocked in productivity. You might be actually unleashing your productivity. What do you think? So the important thing here is, what's the causal mechanism behind being value producers or being blocked in your value production? And when you introspect and figure out the causal story of what makes you successful in doing it or what's blocking you from doing it. So you have your why are you acting or seeking to act, right? The thing you want to produce, whatever that is, fill in the blank. Are you making progress toward it or not? Right? There's a lot of work to do in getting to your why before something like this is going to be useful. Although, for some people, this might be incredibly useful. Maybe you were writing stuff down while I was talking through this writing exercise. If anybody wants to take a minute or two, you don't have to share if it's too personal to you. But if you want to say a little bit about what you're seeking to produce and whether you're stuck or not and why, that might be very fascinating to share. And you don't have to. We never want anybody to have to talk, although people often choose to talk. I like to go in the voluntary discussion mode. Writing I usually make not optional. Everybody writes something. If you want to keep it to yourself, that's up to you. But maybe I wanted to at least have you write it down, these questions, and to think about it for yourself. And if somebody comes up to me in the course of the rest of the evening and wants to talk to me about this, you might be the proud owner of a productivity planner. You know, you were? You were busily writing away? Okay. There you go. Okay, so just to very quickly wrap up here and put a bow on top of the presentation. The takeaways of Micro and Ayn Rand on the virtue of productivity. When it comes down to it, the choice to live is the choice to work, because you have to work in order to live in the very deepest sense of living as a human being, the work of being human. Productivity involves both means and ends, right? So finding your why, that's about the ends, and then how to fill in the categories of that why. And then there's a lot of work to do in the productivity of the means of getting there. No one else can do the work of living but you, right? There's no substitute. It's an inside job. And after all, if happiness is the point of human life, your human life, productive work is essential for achieving that, of being a fulfilled human being at the end of the day. And that's what all the work is for. It's for you. Thank you.